Picture the smartest person you have ever met. Not the loudest one in the room. Not the one with the fastest answer or the most confident opinion. Think carefully, because if you are picturing someone who always seems slightly elsewhere, someone who listens more than they speak, someone who carries a quiet that other people sometimes mistake for distance, you are probably closer to the truth than you think. Psychology research on high IQ individuals consistently produces a finding that surprises almost everyone who encounters it. The behavioral patterns most commonly found in people with extremely high intelligence do not look like intelligence at all. Some of them look like anxiety. Some look like social difficulty. Some look like a person who cannot quite get out of their own way. And the reason they are so consistently misread is that we are looking for the wrong things entirely. Here is what the research actually shows. Trait 1. They need silence the way other people need conversation. There is a widespread assumption that intelligent people are naturally social, that their minds are assets in group settings, that they thrive on stimulation. The data says something more complicated. A study published through the London School of Economics examined the relationship between intelligence, social interaction, and reported life satisfaction. What it found was counterintuitive enough that it made headlines. Highly intelligent individuals reported significantly lower life satisfaction from frequent social interaction than people with average IQs. Not lower enjoyment of deep connection. Lower satisfaction from social interaction as a general category. The reason matters. For a brain that is already running complex processes constantly, not because people are unpleasant, because the brain is already busy. And busy brains do not recharge in noisy rooms. They recharge in quiet ones. What looks like antisocial behavior from the outside is often something far more precise. It is a nervous system that has learned from experience where it recovers and where it depletes. Trait 2. The thinking does not stop, ever. Most people experience mental rest as a natural state. The mind quiets. The background noise drops. Rest feels like rest. For people with very high IQs, this is frequently not how it works. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski spent years studying gifted individuals and identified what he called psychomotor overexcitability, a persistent inner energy that expresses itself not physically but mentally. A drive to think that does not have a natural off switch, not a symptom of anxiety, not a character flaw, a feature of how the brain is built. Neuroscientist Rex Jung's research at the University of New Mexico added a structural explanation. Higher intelligence correlates with richer connectivity between distant regions of the brain, not just faster processing in isolated areas. The highly intelligent brain makes connections across a much larger network simultaneously, all the time. That constant connectivity is why the mind does not quiet easily. It is not malfunctioning. It is doing precisely what it was designed to do, which is unfortunately exhausting. Trait 3. They feel things at a depth most people around them cannot see. This is the trait that surprises people most when they encounter it in the research. Because the cultural image of high intelligence is the detached thinker, the person who lives in logic, the one who is not particularly moved. The research says the opposite. Dabrowski identified a second pattern in gifted individuals that he called emotional overexcitability, a heightened responsiveness to emotional input, to beauty, to music, to moral questions, to the suffering of other people. A study published in the journal Intelligence found that higher measured IQ correlated with significantly greater emotional reactivity, particularly in response to art, ethical complexity, and human behavior. The reason this stays invisible is simple. Highly intelligent people are also exceptionally good at managing how much of what they feel actually surfaces. The processing is deep. The display is controlled. So what appears from the outside as composure is often something much closer to containment. They are not feeling less. They are showing less. And those are not the same thing. Trait 4. They are the most comfortable saying 3 words that most people find almost impossible. I do not know. Not as a social performance. Not as false modesty. Genuinely, precisely, and without apology. This connects directly to what psychology calls the Dunning-Kruger effect, the well-documented finding that lower competence frequently produces higher confidence because the person does not yet know enough to see the complexity that exists in a domain. Trait 5. They find depth the way the rest of us find oxygen, and it is just as hard when it is not there. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth spent decades studying highly gifted adults and identified something she called the problem of stimulus poverty. Not arrogance, not superiority, a quiet, persistent longing for real conversation. They have learned from experience that most conversations are not built to hold the depth they carry, so they bring less of themselves into the room. And a great deal of who they actually are never enters the conversation at all. Trait 6. They change their minds, and they do it without apology. In cognitive psychology, this is called cognitive flexibility, and it is one of the most reliable markers of advanced problem-solving ability. The people who never change their minds regardless of what the evidence shows are almost never the most intelligent people in the room. Trait 7. They observe more than they will ever say. They listen to what is not being said as much as to what is. The quiet person at the table is almost universally assumed to have the least to contribute. In reality, they often have the most complete picture of what is actually happening. They are simply waiting until they have something worth adding. And in most conversations, that moment never quite arrives. Trait 8. The same input never satisfies twice. Neuroscientific research has linked higher cognitive ability to higher baseline dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex. When that challenge disappears, the signal drops sharply. The restlessness that follows is not a mood. It is a physiological response to insufficient stimulation. This is why highly intelligent people often pursue multiple interests simultaneously, why they change careers more than once, why they find themselves strangely dissatisfied in situations that appear from the outside to be perfectly comfortable and objectively good. Trait 9. The doubt is not a weakness. It is a signature. People with very high IQs often experience a degree of internal uncertainty that the people around them would find genuinely difficult to believe. The deeper your understanding of a subject, the more clearly you can see how much remains uncertain. Intelligence does not produce certainty. It produces a more precise and honest map of how much territory remains unexplored. And living with that map is not comfortable. It means carrying the weight of complexity that most people around you are not aware exists. Trait 10. There is a quiet sense, almost constant, of not quite belonging. And this is the one that ties everything together. Highly intelligent people frequently describe a persistent low-level awareness of being slightly out of sync with their immediate environment. Not dramatic alienation, not crisis. A subtle ongoing experience of being calibrated differently from the people around them. This is not a personality disorder. It is not social deficiency. It is the predictable, almost mathematically inevitable result of processing the world at a different resolution than most of the people nearby. When your brain makes more connections, feels more intensely, requires more depth, and sees more of the complexity in any given situation than the environment is offering, a mild sense of displacement is not a symptom. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of research on creativity and exceptional minds remain among the most important in the field, found that individuals with the greatest intellectual capacity almost universally describe their inner lives as the most complex, the most difficult to articulate, and the hardest to share. Not because they were uniquely suffering, because they were experiencing life at a level of detail that most people nearby simply were not. The mind that never stops is not always a gift in the moment. The depth of feeling that goes unshared is not always peaceful. The longing for real conversation that almost never arrives is not a small thing to live with. But here is what is also true. Every single one of these traits has been systematically misread. The person who needs solitude has been called antisocial. The one whose mind never stops has been called anxious. The one who feels deeply has been called too sensitive. The one who cannot find their people has been called difficult. And sometimes what looks like a collection of quiet struggles is something far more specific. A mind that was built to process more, connect more, and go further than most of the environments it moves through every single day. That is not a deficiency. It has never been a deficiency. It is simply a different kind of architecture. And like all architecture built for more than the average load, it requires more maintenance, more space, and far more understanding than it usually receives. If one of these traits gave language to something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, leave it in the comments. Not because the comments section is the answer, but because somewhere in what you write someone else will read it and feel for a moment slightly less alone. And that is not nothing.